Politics is often a life-threatening business, especially for the top officials of a country. For example, various sources claim that there were 200 to 600 attempts on the life of Fidel Castro. His enemies even made plans to go after his famous beard in order to undermine his credibility. But the Cuban leader wasn't the only one to face such tenacious adversaries. It's well known that the Albanian King Zog I survived more than 50 attempts on his life during his reign. In this episode, we'll discover why he was so hated and how he managed to live to old age. Albania was still part of the Ottoman Empire when a son was born into the Kemal Pasha Zogoli's family. The boy's official birthday is October 8, 1895, but some historians argue that he was actually born in 1898. Kemal Pasha named his third son Ahmet Bey Muhtar Zogoli. The Zogoli family was incredibly influential. The boy's father, Kemal Pasha Zogoli, was proprietor and governor of the Mati region. Mati is now one of the 36 districts that can be found on a modern map of Albania. Ahmet's maternal uncle, Sadije Toptani, was an influential Ottoman official, and the future king's mother, Sadije Toptani, claimed to be the direct descendant of Skanderberg, a national hero of Albania who had lived in the 15th century. Skanderberg was one of the first to try to defend the country's independence from the Ottoman Empire. This strongly suggests that a passion for politics was really in Ahmet Zogoli's blood. Ahmet's father died in 1908, and for the next few years his mother led the family, acting as regent for her underage children. Then, in 1911, when he was just 16 years old, Ahmet stepped into the role of leader. Surpassing his older half-brother, he then began to govern the region of Mati. Despite his young age, Zogoli didn't shy away from making important decisions and proved himself early on as an astute politician. In his very first year, the young governor faced a rebellion led by the Young Turks political movement. In his second year, he sparred against two opponents, first the Montenegrin army, then the Serbian army. But the critical historical event took place on November 28, 1912, when Zogoli, as governor of the Mati region, signed a declaration of independence for Albania. This was the result of negotiations at the London Conference of 1912. Ahmet was 17 years old. The start of Zogoli's political career was a success. He had proven himself such a keen politician that he attracted the attention not only of admirers, but also enemies. The young leader couldn't yet know that soon his opponents would attempt to take away his power and his life. His foes would only let themselves be known a few years later. Before becoming a political target, Ahmet Zogoli went to the front of the First World War. The young man volunteered for the Austro-Hungarian army. He risked his life on the battlefield and was even captured several times. In Vienna in 1917 and 1918, then again in Rome in 1918. But the odds turned out to be in his favor, and in 1919, Zogoli returned to his homeland alive and well. The war broadened the young politician's understanding of the world, and the culture and the values of Western countries was instilled in him. This significantly influenced his future political path. But Albania, having for many years existed as part of the Ottoman Empire, was accustomed to more Eastern values. So the Western ideas that Zogoli meant to promote were quite foreign to many. After Albania's recognition internationally as a sovereign state and its admission to the League of Nations in 1920, there was a fight among the various political forces of the state over the right to lead the young country. It was under these difficult circumstances that Zogoli returned from war and took over as the governor of the city of Shkodër. But he wouldn't stay there for long. In 1921, Ahmet's career was already taking off. He had become Minister of Internal Affairs of Albania and declared the city of Tirana the country's capital. In 1922, he took over as Prime Minister in the interim government, while still maintaining his title of Minister of Internal Affairs. It was at this time that he changed his last name from Zogoli to Zog, which means bird in Albanian. This is how history would remember him. Zog's rapid political rise can largely be attributed to his authoritarian policies. On one hand, his reign did benefit the country. He managed to lower the crime rate, and the number of cases of traditional blood feuds decreased. On the other hand, the Prime Minister ruthlessly worked against the democratic principles that he professed, and fought his opposition, not intending to give up his place to anyone. Dispute within the country's political system grew, and with each year, Zog made himself even more enemies. Among them were some quite powerful people, including opposition party leader Fan Noli. In 1923, Albania was preparing to hold elections for its constituent assembly. The political situation became even more heated against the backdrop of the election campaign. When parliament was eventually disbanded, Zog refused to step down, going against established procedure. The election results sparked outrage across the country. The opposition claimed that those in power had resorted to fraud, blackmail, and even murder of those who voted against them. Hatred for the regime in general, and for Zog in particular, grew. On February 23, 1924, it spilled over. On that day, Zog was in the Parliament building. The politician was walking down a hallway when he was approached by a student, Beqir Valteri. Valteri suddenly raised a pistol and shot twice at Ahmet Zog. How this man got into the heavily guarded Parliament building, much less carrying a loaded weapon, remains unknown. Immediately after firing the shots, the attacker fled. The pursuit forced him into one of the restrooms, where he locked himself in and defended himself while singing patriotic songs. Valteri was nevertheless captured, and blame for the assassination attempt was almost immediately laid on the opposition. This was due to the fact that Valteri was a member of the revolutionary Bashkimi party, which is Albanian for unity. As it had in the war, fate once again favored the politician. Zog survived the attempt on his life, but he was forced to give up the post of prime minister in order to regain his health. The trial of Beqir Valteri was held promptly, and a verdict unexpected by the public was issued. The accused was released, and the attack was ruled a private act, not orchestrated by Zog's opposition. It's likely the outcome in that trial was made in collusion, because the leader of the same radical Bashkimi party, Avni Rustemi, was gunned down a short time later. After this attempt on Zog's life came a series of subsequent attacks. Over the course of his 17-year political career, there were 55 assassination attempts against Zog, an average of over 3 per year. After the murder of Avni Rustemi, revolutionary sentiments in the country only intensified. The public quickly made the connection between this shooting and the recent assassination attempt by Valteri. In June of 1924, amidst the backdrop of a new uprising, Zog fled the country and hid in the kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, then also informally known as Yugoslavia. The future king returned to Albania 6 months later. With the support of the Yugoslav army and Russian soldiers, he overthrew leader of the revolution, Fan Noli, and carried out a coup. In January of 1925, Zog achieved the role of president of Albania. But in December of the same year, he declared himself monarch. Ahmet stayed in this position for 3 years, until September 1st, 1928, when the Constituent Assembly of the country approved him as King of the Albanians. Now the politician held all the power in his hands, and bore the proud double name of Zog I and Skanderberg III, after the national hero and freedom fighter of the 15th century, his own distant ancestor. Just like his politics, the path that Zog I took to power didn't please everyone. While still president, he strove to modernize the country along the European model. But while Zog was building a European-style government apparatus in the capital, the rest of Albania continued to live along the Eastern traditions and laws that had been fixed in place by several centuries of Ottoman reign. This caused many conflicts and much discontent for both the common people and the political opposition. In addition, many wished to take revenge on Zog for personal affronts. Historians say that about 600 total acts of blood feud, a common aspect of Albanian culture at the time, were committed and prepared against Zog. For example, Zog lived in fear of a blood feud from Shevket Bej Verlaci, the father of the girl whom he'd been engaged. Zog had broken off the engagement immediately after proclaiming himself king. Because of this, according to the laws of the common people, Verlaci had the right to kill Ahmet in order to protect the honor of his family. Attempts to kill the king for political reasons also became more frequent. Knowing of this danger, the monarch lived in fear for many years, always anticipating the next attack. Zog I began to avoid public speaking and surrounded himself with numerous guards wherever he went. He even carried a personal weapon. For safety reasons, Zog's mother took over the control of all the king's meals, since he was deathly afraid of being poisoned. However, all of these precautions could not deter Zog's enemies. An especially noteworthy assassination attempt was the attack that took place on February 21st, 1931. On that day, the king was in Vienna. He and his attendants had gone to the Vienna State Opera for a production of Pagliacci. Immediately following the performance, the attackers overtook Zog I. The monarch was just getting into his car when Aziz Sami and Nadot Jaloshi, members of the oppositional National Union Party, opened fire on him. The king was saved thanks to a series of fortuitous circumstances. Firstly, the shooters mistook Zog's guard for the king himself and shot him 3 times in the back of the head. Secondly, one of the bullets flew past the king and wounded then Prime Minister of Albania, Ekrem Libahova. The Viennese police also reacted swiftly, seizing the gunmen. In one version of the story, Zog I played a key role in his salvation. Some historians say that after the first shots, the king took out his personal pistol and returned fire at his attackers. After the assassination attempt, almost all organizers and members of the National Union Party based in Vienna were arrested and expelled from Austria. The shooters, Sami and Jaloshi, were sentenced to 2.5 years and 3.5 years in prison. Even this most daring assassination attempt did not cause Zog I to reconsider his policies. He stayed in power until 1939, when Albania was occupied by Mussolini's fascist Italy. Here too, Zog I was lucky to survive. Understanding that the invasion was inevitable, the royal family gathered all their gold and fled into exile. The occupation was only possible due to, among other things, errors that Zog had made in his relations with Mussolini. By 1930, Albania was already heavily economically dependent on Italy, and growing more so year by year. Over the next several years, the former king moved from country to country, eventually settling with his family in France, where he died on April 9, 1961, at the age of 65. According to some witnesses, Zog had smoked 200 cigarettes a day since 1929. The veracity of this statement is hard to determine today, but the indisputable fact remains that the king of the Albanians masterfully avoided death for many years. Can Zog I really be considered lucky if he constantly faced death but was never defeated by it until old age? We'll be glad to see what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to give us a thumbs up and share this video with your friends.